Hi guys, welcome back to Nature at Home. My name is Zoe and today we're going to be talking about some amazing adaptations that our animals up here in New York have. So let's first start off by talking about what an adaptation is. An adaptation is a special skill that helps an animal to survive in the wild. They could be physical changes to an animal's body or a behavioral change in how an animal or society acts. Now we're going to talk about a bird of prey, the red-tailed hawk. Red-tailed hawks have awesome adaptations that help them to hunt. They have very strong, sharp talons that enable them to catch their prey, and they have hooked beaks that are designed for ripping and tearing pieces of meat. So wood frogs are actually able to essentially freeze their bodies in winter. So they'll stop breathing and their heart will stop beating, and this allows them to survive low temperatures. And then in the spring, when it warms up, they thaw out and come back to life. So pretty cool. Next up, we're going to talk about an adaptation of turtles. So when I say an awesome adaptation that turtles have, the first thing that probably comes to mind is their protective shell. So this shell protects them when they're out walking around because only their legs and head and tail are exposed. But then they can take it a step further, and when they're scared or trying to avoid a predator, they can tuck inside this shell and their whole body's protective. So it's a really good adaptation that they've developed. So talking about a more specific turtle, we're going to talk about the common snapping turtle. So snapping turtles have a great adaptation, and that is their long neck and their very pointed beak. So with this long neck, they're able to reach around pretty far. They can lay in wait for a fish to swim by and snap that long neck right out and grab that fish without that fish seeing it coming. This long neck is really, really good for the snapping turtle to have. It's a great advantage. And then their pointed beak. So their mouth is very, very sharp. That beak is very pointed and sharp. It is designed to be able to stab fish or stab their food, and it's very powerful. It'd be very painful to get bit by a snapping turtle. Next up is the opossum. And opossums have several great adaptations, but the one we're going to talk about today is playing possum. So opossums, when they get very startled, they have what's essentially a heart attack, and they'll faint. And this is called playing possum or playing dead. During this time, the possums look very much dead, and they'll sometimes release an odor, that way they smell dead too. And it's very believable, and they can stay this way for several minutes, several hours. It really just depends on the situation. But this has helped possums from being eaten many times because most animals, they want to stay away from a dead possum. They're hunting live possums. This dead, rotting possum, they might not want it. That doesn't go for all animals, but for some animals, this playing possum adaptation that they have is a great trick. Next up, we'll talk about skunks. Now, something that we all know about skunks is that they can be a little stinky. And this is a great adaptation that they have. So they have these musk glands so that when they're threatened, they have a nice stinky smell that they can spray. But that's not their only adaptation. Their color and their pattern is actually an adaptation as well. This is a physical adaptation. This black and white, very vivid pattern with their stripes acts as a warning to predators that might want to eat them. Because usually when you have an animal that has very vivid patterns that stands out very well, that's a warning sign saying, "Don't eat me, I'm dangerous." Next up is the coyote. We actually recently just did a video all about coyotes, and Joel did mention these in that video. Coyotes' fur is a good adaptation. It's nice and thick, so it keeps them warm in winter, and its color also helps them to camouflage out in the woods. So being able to camouflage and keep yourself warm, that's really important. So these are some good adaptations for the coyote. Next up is the white-tailed deer, another animal we talked about, but way back at the beginning of our Nature at Home videos. One of their adaptations is their long legs. These allow them to sprint through the woods and jump really well, so they're very agile in running through the woods to get away from predators. Next up, the beaver. So if you recall from our beaver video, we talked about how beavers spend a lot of time building dams, building ponds from the dams. They have their little house in the middle of the pond, so they spend a lot of time in the water. So they need some good adaptations that help them in the water. So one adaptation they have is that they actually have clear eyelids, and these help them to see underwater while keeping their eyes protected. Last but not least for today's video, we're going to talk about the porcupine. And I think we all know what the porcupine's really awesome adaptation is, and that's its quills. You don't really have a much better form of defense than having a body covered in quills. Alright, so thank you guys for joining us today for another Nature at Home video. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 1 p.m. for another video. And I'd like to give a quick thank you to the New York State Power Authority for funding the Nature Center and all its activities. And we'll see you tomorrow.